There's a moment in Earth's history that feels like it was ripped from a science fiction movie, except it wasn't fiction. It happened, and it transformed our planet into an alien world that would terrify us today. Imagine breathing air so thick with oxygen that it would make you dizzy within minutes. A world where a single lightning strike could set even damp forests ablaze in unstoppable infernos. A realm where insects grew to monstrous proportions, with dragonflies sporting wingspans wider than your arm and millipedes longer than your sofa. Welcome to Earth during the Carboniferous period, when our atmosphere contained 35% oxygen, nearly double what we breathe today. And for a staggering 60 million years, this hypercharged atmosphere transformed life in ways that seem impossible. So, if these stories help you relax or whatever, hit like or subscribe. Also curious where everyone's at. Comment your city and time, reading through last video's comments and seeing Miami, Manchester and Melbourne all in there. The internet's weird, right? This isn't just a story about big bugs. It's about a bizarre chapter in our planet's biography when the very chemistry of the air reshaped everything alive. It's about how our planet once created conditions that will never, can never exist again. And it all began with an evolutionary accident. To step into the late Carboniferous world of 300 million years ago is to enter a planet in transformation. The continents weren't scattered as they are today. They were assembling into one massive supercontinent called Pangaea, a vast landmass stretching from pole to pole surrounded by a single global ocean. The land was raw, newly conquered by life, and it pulsed with humidity. But what truly set this era apart wasn't the shape of the continents, it was the forests. The Carboniferous period saw the rise of Earth's first true rainforests, and they were unlike anything alive today. Towering over the landscape were giant lycopsids, ancient club mosses, growing up to 100 feet tall. That's a 10-story building, and technically they weren't even trees as we understand them. These plants had hollow, water-filled stems and reproduced with spores, not seeds. Alongside them stood seed ferns, giant horsetails and tree-sized fungi that reached nearly 25 feet high. It was a time so old that even plants were primitive beings. No flowers, no fruits, no grasses. The world was still a few 100 million years away from the hum of bees or the shade of oaks. These early forests were a brand new concept. Damp, dense and dark, an endless tangle of ferns and shadow choked with vines and crawling with life. Beneath the canopy, the floor was alive with decay. The Carboniferous swamp forests became massive peat bogs, trapping dead plant matter under waterlogged soil. Over millions of years, this carbon-rich soup compressed into the coal seams we still dig up today. But this lush world wasn't just a paradise. The dense plant life released massive amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere through photosynthesis, far more than the planet had ever seen. Some estimates suggest the air reached up to 35% oxygen compared to 21% today. That's enough to make a modern human dizzy with every breath or make a candle burn twice as fast. And this oxygen-rich world was perfect for one group, arthropods. Insects, spiders, millipedes and scorpions flourished here, not just in numbers, but in scale. Vertebrates, by contrast, were still figuring things out. Early amphibians had made the leap onto land, and some had grown large, 6 feet or more, but they were limited by moist skin and water-bound eggs. Reptiles were just beginning to emerge, developing the dry, scaly armor and shelled eggs that would one day give rise to dinosaurs. But for now, all of them were background players. It was a world of giants in chitin. So, how did insects grow to such monstrous sizes? The secret lies in how they breathe. If you've ever wondered, insects rely on a completely different oxygen delivery system than mammals or reptiles, one that's elegant but critically inefficient. Insects don't have lungs, no diaphragm, no air sacs, no deep breaths. Instead, their entire respiratory system is a branching network of tiny tubes called tracheae that deliver oxygen directly to their cells by passive diffusion. It's like having millions of microscopic snorkels running throughout their bodies. Oxygen simply drifts in through openings in their exoskeleton called spiracles and diffuses to where it's needed. This system works beautifully for small creatures, but there's a major problem. It doesn't scale well. The bigger the body, the harder it is to push oxygen all the way through without active transport. In today's atmosphere, this puts a hard cap on insect size, with the largest being the giant wheater in New Zealand. These chunky cricket relatives can reach up to 7 centimeters and weigh about 70 grams. Impressive, but still small enough to fit in your hand. But during the Carboniferous, the higher atmospheric oxygen concentration meant that even large-bodied insects could get enough oxygen passively. Suddenly, insects had plenty of room to grow. Atmospheric oxygen acted like an evolutionary steroid for invertebrates. This link isn't just theoretical, it's been tested. In 2007, researchers at Arizona State University raised modern insects in controlled environments with varying oxygen concentrations. The results were striking. When reared in hyperoxic conditions, some species of dragonflies and beetles grew significantly larger than their normal counterparts. The same principles that shaped giants millions of years ago still lurk inside their genomes today. Let's imagine standing in the middle of a Carboniferous jungle. Your boots sink slightly into the spongy ground. Dense, waterlogged peat formed from millions of years of decaying plant matter. The air is thick, not just with moisture, but with oxygen, all 35% of it. That's more than 1.5 times what we breathe today. You feel lightheaded, your chest rises faster than usual, not out of panic, but chemistry. That kind of oxygen density would make you dizzy, euphoric even, and dangerously flammable. One spark, one lightning strike, and even the wettest wood could go up in flames. Ever heard of spontaneous combustion? In this atmosphere, it wouldn't be a myth. You look down and see roots winding across the swamp floor like veins under the skin of the earth. Everywhere there's movement, tiny arthropods, early amphibians, things with too many legs and too little regard for your presence. But the real spectacle is above. You lift your gaze, and for a second your brain struggles to make sense of what it's seeing. Because up there in the canopy-shrouded sky are creatures that shouldn't exist. Not in your world, not by your rules. You hear a flutter overhead. A pair of wings passes through the filtered light of the Carboniferous canopy, and for a moment it looks like a bird if birds had never been invented and evolution had tried something different. It's no bird. It's Paleodictyoptera, with wingspans ranging from 15 to 22 inches. These were some of the largest winged insects to ever exist. Fossils show they were among the earliest flyers in Earth's history, predating both true dragonflies and modern butterflies by tens of millions of years. But despite their size, they weren't predators. They were gentle gliders, relics of evolutionary experimentation. The name Paleodictyoptera means ancient netwing, and it fits. Their 4 main wings, 2 fore and 2 hind, were richly veined, forming geometric patterns like stained glass or spider silk. These insects also possessed a pair of additional small wing-like lobes near the front of their thorax, just behind the head, often referred to as prothoracic winglets, that make 6 wing-like extensions in total, though only 4 were used for powered flight. These front lobes weren't true wings in the aerodynamic sense, but they may have served as stabilizers or represented an ancestral stage in wing evolution. Some paleontologists suggest these structures support the theory that insect wings evolved from gill-like structures in aquatic ancestors. Paleodictyopterans weren't designed for high-speed chases. They were herbivores, sippers of plant sap and feeders of soft tissues. Their mouthparts included a primitive proboscis, a needle-like projection used for piercing vegetation and extracting fluids. This made them among the earliest insects to evolve specialized feeding strategies beyond chewing, paving the way for everything from butterflies to mosquitoes. Some of them may have had vibrant patterns on their wings, like living kites suspended in sunlight, though we can only guess at their coloration. Fossils preserve the structure, not the paint, but their presence alone suggests something profound. Flight had arrived. For the first time in Earth's history, an animal wasn't limited to crawling or swimming. It could fly. Evolution had found a way to exploit a completely new realm on this planet. The air. Paleodictyoptera opened the skies to life. But they weren't the only ones taking advantage of the oxygen-rich atmosphere, and not all the aerial giants were peaceful plant sippers. Some were hunters, and they were about to change the game forever. 2 wings, then 4, wide, veined, and beating like sails. Eyes the size of marbles. Legs like grappling hooks, and a wingspan nearly the length of your arm. This is Meganeura monyi, and for millions of years it was the apex predator of the Carboniferous skies. Reaching wingspans up to 28 inches and body lengths of 13 inches, Meganeura was a giant by any standard. Modern birds would struggle to match its silhouette, but Meganeura wasn't just big, it was lethal. Its 4 wings worked independently, allowing it to hover, bank, dive, and accelerate with surgical precision. Its eyes were enormous compound orbs, nearly 360 degrees of vision, like 2 full-dome cameras stitched into its skull. Like modern dragonflies, it likely had a prey capture success rate above 90%, and its prey wasn't gnats or mosquitoes. Fossil evidence and biomechanical modelling suggest it hunted other insects, juvenile amphibians, and possibly even small vertebrates. Its legs were barbed with long, claw-like tarsal segments that formed a spiny basket mid-flight. Anything caught in it, soft-bodied insects, smaller winged prey, was crushed mid-air. No ground kill, no chase needed, just strike and consume. Meganeura didn't glide awkwardly like a prehistoric experiment. It flew like it was born for it, and yet we still don't fully understand its life cycle. We assume it began like modern dragonflies as an aquatic nymph, likely a voracious predator in carboniferous ponds and marshes. Its juvenile form might have had gills, ambush strategies, and a taste for tadpoles or tiny crustaceans. Then after molting, possibly several times, it would emerge, stretch its wings, and begin its reign above the canopy. Its fossil record is patchy but unmistakable. The first remains were discovered in 1880 in France, and additional specimens have since been found in Europe and North America. The wing venation, complex, grid-like, almost architectural, is a defining feature. It wasn't just strong, it was engineered. No other insect would come close to its aerial dominance until hundreds of millions of years later. While the skies of the Carboniferous were dominated by these dragonfly-like predators, the forest floor had its own terrors, and they were even more alien than what soared above. Creatures that would make your skin crawl not just because of their appearance, but because they represent one of our oldest, most primal fears. Something massive moves through the underbrush, something with too many legs and an armored body that shouldn't be possible at that size. You've just encountered one of the most nightmarish creations of the oxygen-rich world, a predator that would make even modern horror directors think twice about including it in their films. But what exactly was this creature, and how did it hunt in the primitive forests of the Carboniferous? The answer lies in one of the most remarkable fossil discoveries from this alien chapter of Earth's history. Meet Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, the largest scorpion to have ever walked the earth. It stretched nearly 28 inches long from claw to stinger. That's about the size of a modern house cat, but with a completely different energy. Its body was covered in thick, chitinous armor sculpted like interlocking plates of obsidian. Each movement was deliberate, each footfall calculated. This wasn't a creature in a hurry because it didn't need to be. Pulmonoscorpius was at the top of the food chain in its niche, an apex predator of the Carboniferous forest floor. It hunted by ambush and by sensory precision, using a toolkit that seemed almost overbuilt for its time. Let's start with the pedipalps, those front appendages that look like arms ending in pincers. They were massive, muscle-packed weapons that could crush the exoskeletons of arthropods and pin down struggling amphibians. Fossil morphology suggests they had serrated inner ridges, ideal for gripping slippery, soft-bodied prey. And of course, we need to talk about the tail. It arched high above its body, ending in a curved stinger likely tipped with venom. While no direct fossil evidence of the venom gland survives, modern scorpions give us a clear analogue, and there's no reason to assume Pulmonoscorpius was any less equipped. Its size alone would allow for significant venom volume, making even a single sting lethal to small vertebrates. Its eyes were another advantage. Pulmonoscorpius had two main types, a central pair that likely provided spatial depth perception and lateral eyes spread across its carapace for detecting motion and changes in light. Like modern arachnids, it may have also had sensory hairs called trichobothria, which could detect the slightest air movements. It could sense prey coming long before it arrived. Even vibrations on the ground caused by the soft steps of a juvenile tetrapod could be enough to give away its position. And that made Pulmonoscorpius a perfect ambush predator. It didn't chase, it waited. It blended into the dark spaces beneath decaying club moss trunks or hunched beneath a blanket of fern litter where its armored body was nearly indistinguishable from its surroundings. Then snap, strike, inject, wait. It likely fed on a range of creatures, smaller arthropods, mollusks, early amphibians, even the first primitive reptiles if they were slow or unlucky enough. Fossil records from Scotland's Kirkton Quarry place it squarely in the Carboniferous, thriving in what was once a wetland environment full of fallen vegetation and dense underbrush, perfect terrain for ambush predators. But despite its terrifying appearance, Pulmonoscorpius was a one-time phenomenon. Modern scorpions rarely grow beyond 8 inches, and even the largest living species, the emperor scorpion, is a fraction of its extinct ancestor. Still, for a brief moment in Earth's history, this ancient hunter was unchallenged, and yet there were even bigger arthropods walking the Carboniferous landscape. At first, you might think it's a log being dragged across the forest floor, but then it bends around a tree trunk. This is Arthropod, and it is quite literally the biggest land invertebrate that has ever lived. We know this not just from fossils, but from trackways. Massive, undulating impressions left in Carboniferous sediment and preserved in the stone record. Some are so wide and deep that you could lie inside them. Arthropod measured up to 8.5 feet long and weighed as much as a large dog or more. It looked like a millipede, but was nothing like the ones that curl up in your garden. Arthropod was a multi-ton centipede tank hybrid covered in a hard, segmented exoskeleton. Its dorsal plates locked together like roof tiles, giving it protection from above, while its dozens of leg pairs gave it traction through mud, root networks, and decomposing plant matter. Despite its terrifying size, Arthropod appears to have been a herbivore or detritivore, a decomposer feeding on decaying vegetation, mosses, and perhaps even fungal matter. Fossil evidence from gut contents is sparse, but its jaw structure lacks the piercing or slicing features you'd expect from a predator. Instead, it likely ground up soft plant tissues, slowly converting the forest floor into mulch. And yet, in this world, being massive was a form of protection in itself. Size meant safety. Even predators like Pulmonoscorpius would likely have thought twice before attacking an animal with a nearly impenetrable shell and mass on its side. No known vertebrate from that era could challenge it in a direct confrontation. Its widespread fossil evidence from Scotland, Germany, and North America suggests it was common in Carboniferous wetland forests, especially in areas prone to periodic flooding where decaying plant matter piled up fast. And yet, for all its size, we've never found its complete head. The exact structure of its mouthparts remains a mystery, as does much of its reproductive biology. Did it guard its eggs? Did it burrow? We can only speculate. And as with so many giants of this era, what we know is impressive, but what we don't know is even more intriguing. The Carboniferous was a time of evolutionary experimentation, creatures testing the limits of what was physically possible in a hyperoxic world. Take Megarachne cervinae, for example. For decades, that mega prefix was taken literally. It was considered the largest spider to have ever lived. Paleontologists, journalists, even school textbooks described it as an 8-legged terror of the Carboniferous wetlands, with a leg span that would have covered a dinner plate, until 2005, when a team led by Dr. Paul Selden re-examined the original fossil, and what they found changed the narrative. Megarachne wasn't actually a spider. It wasn't even an arachnid. It belonged to a whole other family, the Eurypterids, a long-extinct group of arthropods more commonly known as sea scorpions. Megarachne didn't weave webs or creep through the underbrush. It crawled along the bottom of Carboniferous riverbeds, sweeping through the sediment with paddle-like limbs in search of food. It belonged to the same broad evolutionary family as scorpions, horseshoe crabs and trilobites, aquatic hunters and bottom feeders that thrived before fish and amphibians came to dominate the shallows. But even if it wasn't a spider, it was still huge. Estimates based on the fossil suggest a body length of about 21 inches, making it one of the largest known Eurypterids from freshwater environments. Its limbs were squat and broad, made for anchoring in soft mud and shoveling through detritus, and its feeding method was likely sweep feeding, using specialized appendages to rake through silt and trap small prey like worms, insect larvae, or crustaceans. Its thick carapace, preserved in beautiful detail in the fossil record, resembled the segmented body of a terrestrial spider, which is what originally confused researchers, but its structure was fundamentally different. No spinnerets, no fangs, and no clear adaptations for air-breathing life. It lived in water, shallow, swampy, oxygen-rich water where decaying vegetation fed a whole ecosystem of bottom dwellers and filter feeders. And Megarachne sat comfortably near the top of that aquatic world. It shared this lineage with giants. Its ancestors included Jacalopterus rhenaniae and Pterygotus, marine eurypterids that reached 8 feet or more. Megarachne was smaller but unique, one of the few eurypterids adapted to freshwater, bridging a critical transition from oceanic to terrestrial ecosystems. And when you look at its armoured body and flattened limbs, you see a different kind of terror, something so alien from us, so fundamentally different in its body plan that it triggers an instinctive fear, a reaction to something that breaks all the rules of what an animal should be. But not all the terrors of the Carboniferous needed size or speed. Some just needed to be first. Trigonotarbids were among the first true terrestrial predators, land-based, air-breathing, and fully at home in the Carboniferous undergrowth. Some fossils date them to at least 419 million years ago, well before the Carboniferous. They were among the first creatures to abandon the safety of water and claim the land as their own. They look like spiders, and for decades they were often classified as such. Trigonotarbids were arachnids, yes, but not true spiders. They couldn't spin webs. They had no silk glands. Instead, their bodies were low, segmented, and heavily armoured with a shell-like carapace, protecting their head and thorax. Their abdomens were covered in plates, and their 8 legs were spined and nimble, ideal for navigating a cluttered forest floor. Their prey were small, soft-bodied invertebrates. Their jaws, or chelicerae, were strong enough to crush and tear. Once captured, the prey was held in place by the legs and consumed alive. Some trigonotarbids were just a few millimeters long, and the largest about 2 inches. Their small size was their strength. In a world of enormous predators, they could go unnoticed. They breathed through book lungs, just like modern scorpions and spiders, and their internal anatomy shows a level of adaptation that's staggering for its time. Fossils from the Rhynie Chert site in Scotland preserve trigonotarbids in stunning detail, down to their respiratory organs, their mouthparts, even the hairs on their legs. And for tens of millions of years, they thrived. Then quietly, they vanished. No catastrophic extinction event, no final predator to end their reign. They were simply outpaced by spiders, by scorpions, by more specialized arachnids who came later and evolved the one thing trigonotarbids never did: silk. But while trigonotarbids faded quietly into history, in the oceans and shallows, another kind of armour was evolving, one that didn't need webs or stealth because it had something else: raw defence. This was Lepidocoleus, better known by its unofficial nickname, the Excalibur worm, and despite being only a few millimeters long, it might have been the most heavily armoured animal in its size class in all of Earth's history. It lived over 400 million years ago, during the Devonian period, predating the Carboniferous rainforest by tens of millions of years. Its fossils were first uncovered in what is now Western Australia, in shallow reef environments that once bordered ancient seas. Lepidocoleus was protected by a full-body exoskeleton made of overlapping mineralized plates composed of crystalline calcite, a structure more like medieval chainmail than soft annelid tissue. These plates interlocked, forming a flexible yet nearly impenetrable suit of armour. They resembled miniature scales or overlapping shields, and when the worm curled into a ball, much like a pillbug, it presented only the outer plates to the world. No predator in that size class stood a chance of breaking through. That armour was so advanced it inspired its nickname, the Excalibur worm, after the legendary sword of King Arthur, because like the blade in the stone, it seemed too perfect, too finely built, too out of place for such an ancient time. But like all evolutionary advantages, there was a trade-off. It may have been invulnerable to attack, but it paid the price in mobility. The armor slowed it down, limited its reach, and possibly made it harder to disperse to new habitats. It could defend, but it couldn't compete forever. We don't know exactly what it ate, possibly organic waste, microbial mats, or small detritus particles swept up from the seafloor. It didn't leave tooth marks. What it left was a fossilized marvel, a micro-scale masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. And then, quietly, it vanished. In a time of escalating predators and rising vertebrates, survival by defense alone was no longer enough. But for a time, deep in ancient tropical seas, this tiny creature lived wrapped in crystal plates, carried a fortress on its back, and dared the world to try. The key to understanding all these strange creatures lies in how they breathed. Arthropods have a unique respiratory system that worked remarkably well in the oxygen-rich Carboniferous atmosphere, but imposed strict limits as oxygen levels declined. Modern insects have openings called spiracles along their bodies that connect to a network of increasingly tiny tubes called tracheae. These tubes branch throughout the body, delivering oxygen directly to tissues through passive diffusion. No pumping, no blood oxygen carriers like our hemoglobin. Oxygen simply moves from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. This system is incredibly efficient for small animals. Because oxygen goes straight to the cells that need it, insects can achieve extraordinarily high metabolic rates for their size, allowing for rapid wing beats and quick movements. But there's a critical limitation. Diffusion only works over short distances. The larger an insect grows, the longer its tracheal tubes must become, and the harder it is for oxygen to reach the center of the body. In today's atmosphere, with 21% oxygen, this creates a hard size limit, but in the Carboniferous, with 35% oxygen, that cap was lifted. Suddenly, passive diffusion could work over much greater distances. Giant insects weren't just possible, they were inevitable. The same physical principles that limit insect size today allowed them to grow enormous in the oxygen-rich past. But it wasn't just about breathing. The Carboniferous giants also had incredible strength. If you had to compare insects, mammals, and reptiles in a pound-for-pound strength contest, insects would easily win. The dung beetle can pull 1,141 times its body weight. If a human had to do the same, we'd need to be pulling 6 buses simultaneously. Other contenders include the rhinoceros beetle with 850 times its body weight, the leafcutter ant carrying 50 to 100 times its weight, and the trapjaw ant with a bite force of 50 times its body weight. They outperform other powerhouses of nature like tigers, grizzly bears, and silverback gorillas. Even the mighty gorilla only manages about 10 times its body weight. All of this comes from their exoskeleton structure and muscle arrangement, allowing them to exert tremendous force relative to their size. Now imagine these same mechanical advantages scaled up to the size of a dog or larger in the Carboniferous. The strength of these ancient arthropods would have been absolutely phenomenal. But the age of insects was nearing its end, and the cause wasn't what you might expect. No asteroid, no volcanic winter, no great extinction sweeping the board clean in a single geological breath. Instead, the end came like a long exhale, gradual, uneven, but final all the same. By the end of the Carboniferous, around 300 million years ago, the great swamplands that had dominated Earth's equatorial zones began to fracture. What was once a vast, humid jungle, perfect for the massive oxygen-producing plants and the giants they supported, started to break apart. Why? Because Pangaea was closing in. The tectonic forces that were slowly assembling all the world's land masses into one enormous supercontinent did more than shift coastlines. They changed climate. As the continents collided, mountain ranges rose, altering air circulation and rainfall patterns. The moist, swampy habitats began to dry out, rainforests fragmented, peat bogs shrank. The carbon sink that had pumped Earth's atmosphere full of oxygen for millions of years was shutting down, and the oxygen began to fall. From its peak, atmospheric oxygen levels started a slow, irreversible decline. By the early Permian period, they had dropped to something closer to 25%. Still high by modern standards, but not enough to sustain the physiology of giants. Large insects could no longer get enough oxygen to support their mass. And that wasn't the only problem. The collapse of the rainforest ecosystems triggered what scientists now call the Carboniferous rainforest collapse around 305 million years ago. As habitats dried and fragmented, many amphibians and large arthropods lost their ecological niches. Fire became more frequent in the drier climate. Fungi better suited to decomposition in cooler, oxygen-thin environments began to outcompete plants in breaking down wood, meaning less carbon was trapped in the soil and more stayed in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. The biosphere was rebalancing itself, but not in favour of the giants. And then came the reptiles. With their amniotic eggs and scaly, watertight skin, early reptiles didn't need swamps. They could move inland, lay eggs on dry soil, breathe less oxygen, and keep growing. They weren't dominant yet, but they were flexible, adaptive, poised to inherit what the invertebrates could no longer hold. By the dawn of the Permian period, around 299 million years ago, the reign of the giant arthropods was effectively over. Some of their lineages survived. Smaller, more efficient, more conservative, but the age of giants had passed. It's tempting to imagine a different outcome. What if evolution had rolled the dice another way? Could insects have retained their size? Could we be living in a world with hummingbird-sized wasps and condor-sized beetles? Probably not, because once vertebrates got their act together, once lungs and complex circulatory systems entered the arms race, arthropods lost their edge. The vertebrate body plan allowed for more mobility, more adaptability, and most of all, scalability. And scale matters. When birds took to the skies and mammals emerged from the underbrush, the pressure was on. Competition intensified. New predators, new prey, new tactics. Insects didn't disappear, but they couldn't dominate the way they once did. Still, echoes of that ancient insect empire remain. We see it in the silent glide of dragonflies, whose flight mechanics haven't changed in 300 million years, in the segmented armour of millipedes, in the alien elegance of mantises patiently hunting like miniature dinosaurs. They're smaller now, less terrifying, but no less remarkable. They didn't evolve that much in the meantime. They scaled down, but many of the mechanisms we saw back then are still in place or with very few adaptations. But could such a hyperoxic world ever return? The answer is a definitive no, and the reasons why reveal one of the most fascinating evolutionary arms races in Earth's history. The story centres around a seemingly mundane substance called lignin. Today, we take it for granted, but lignin was a revolutionary innovation when plants first evolved it roughly 400 million years ago. This complex polymer gave plants rigid support, allowing them to grow taller and compete for sunlight. Lignin is what puts the wood in woody plants. It's a key component of tree trunks, branches, and other supportive tissues. But lignin had a property that would change Earth's atmosphere. It was extremely difficult to break down biologically. When the first plants evolved lignin, nothing on Earth could efficiently decompose it. When these plants died, instead of rotting completely, much of their carbon-rich tissue became buried in swampy conditions, eventually forming coal. This created a one-way flow of carbon from the atmosphere into plant tissue, then into the ground, and for every carbon atom locked away, free oxygen remained in the atmosphere. This imbalance, carbon going in without coming back out, drove oxygen levels higher and higher over millions of years. Then something happened that would forever change Earth's chemistry. Around the end of the Carboniferous period, a certain group of fungi evolved the ability to efficiently break down lignin. These white rot fungi developed enzymatic tools to dismantle the tough polymer, releasing its stored carbon back to the atmosphere. It was an evolutionary innovation as important as the evolution of lignin itself. Suddenly, the one-way carbon street became a two-way exchange. Dead plants could now be fully decomposed, their carbon returned to the atmosphere, preventing the buildup of oxygen. This fungal innovation was so efficient that it fundamentally rewired Earth's carbon cycle. Never again would conditions allow for the massive carbon burial that created the Carboniferous oxygen peak. The same early versions of these fungi can be found in amber from the late Carboniferous, right when oxygen levels began to fall. Today, every forest floor is teeming with lignin-degrading fungi. Every fallen log hosts a community of decomposers that can break it down completely. Modern trees still produce lignin, but now it's part of a balanced carbon cycle rather than a one-way ticket to sequestration. The evolution of lignin-degrading fungi is why we'll never see 35% oxygen again. It's a perfect example of how life itself reshapes the planet's chemistry, creating feedback loops that persist for hundreds of millions of years. But fungi weren't the only organisms that changed the game. The evolution of termites around 150 million years ago introduced another highly efficient wood-decomposing system. These insects, with their specialized gut microbiomes, became incredibly effective at breaking down cellulose and other plant materials. Today, termites process roughly a third of all dead wood in tropical environments. These decomposers, fungi, bacteria, termites and others, now form a continuous cleanup crew that prevents the massive carbon burial that once drove oxygen levels so high. It's not just about the absence of swampy forests, it's about the presence of creatures that couldn't exist until evolution solved the lignin puzzle. This evolutionary arms race, plants developing tough lignin, fungi eventually developing ways to break it down, fundamentally changed Earth's atmosphere. It's a shift as significant as the Great Oxygenation event 2 billion years earlier, but in the opposite direction, not eliminating oxygen, but preventing it from reaching such extreme levels again. The Carboniferous oxygen peak wasn't just a strange chapter in Earth's history. It was a one-time event, a window of opportunity created by a temporary imbalance in the carbon cycle that life itself eventually corrected. And this brings us to another remarkable insight about our atmosphere. It isn't just a physical feature of the planet, it's a biological creation shaped by the metabolic activities of countless organisms over billions of years. The air we breathe is, in a very real sense, a product of life itself. But the Carboniferous wasn't the only time oxygen levels changed dramatically. Let's zoom out to see the full sweep of oxygen's history on Earth, because it tells a story of revolution, balance, and the rise of complexity. For the first 2 billion years of Earth's existence, there was virtually no free oxygen in the atmosphere, less than 1,000th of 1%. Early life forms were anaerobes, using chemicals other than oxygen in their metabolism. The planet's atmosphere was dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane, more like today's Venus or Mars than modern Earth. Then, around 2.4 billion years ago, something revolutionary happened. Simple single-celled organisms called cyanobacteria perfected photosynthesis, the ability to use sunlight to split water molecules, producing energy and releasing oxygen as a waste product. It was, from the bacteria's perspective, just a useful metabolic trick, but it would transform the planet. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere. Much of it initially reacted with dissolved iron in the oceans, creating massive rust deposits called banded iron formations that we still mine today. But eventually, the oxygen overwhelmed these chemical sinks and began to build up in the atmosphere. This event, the Great Oxygenation Event, was Earth's first atmospheric revolution. Oxygen levels rose from nearly 0 to perhaps 1 or 2% of the atmosphere. It was also Earth's first mass extinction, as anaerobic organisms that found oxygen toxic were wiped out or retreated to oxygen-free environments. For the next 1.5 billion years, oxygen levels remained relatively low, perhaps fluctuating between 1 and 10%. Then, around 800 million years ago, another oxygen increase began, the Neoproterozoic oxygenation event, pushing levels to perhaps 15% of the atmosphere. This may have helped trigger the evolution of the first complex animals. From about 550 to 400 million years ago, oxygen gradually increased to around 20% as the first land plants evolved and spread. Then came the dramatic rise during the Carboniferous that we've been exploring, reaching that peak of 30 to 35% around 300 million years ago. Since then, oxygen has experienced several oscillations but never again reached such heights. There was a significant drop during the Permian and Triassic periods to perhaps 15%, followed by a rise during the Cretaceous period to around 25 to 30%. For the past 60 million years, levels have gradually declined to our current 21%. What's remarkable about this history is how closely it aligns with the evolution of complex life. Each major increase in atmospheric oxygen corresponds with the emergence of more complex, energy-demanding life forms. The Great Oxygenation Event prepared Earth for the first eukaryotic cells. The Neoproterozoic increase preceded the Cambrian explosion of animal diversity. The Carboniferous peak enabled the first large land animals. Oxygen isn't just a background condition for life. It's been a driver of evolutionary innovation, repeatedly enabling new forms of complexity. Higher oxygen levels allow for higher metabolic rates, which in turn support more complex body plans and behaviors. Today's atmosphere, with its 21% oxygen, represents a long-term equilibrium between oxygen-producing processes, primarily photosynthesis, and oxygen-consuming processes, respiration, decomposition, and chemical weathering. It's high enough to support complex life like us, but low enough to prevent the runaway fires that would have been common in the Carboniferous. Human activities are causing a very slight decrease in atmospheric oxygen, about 0.001% per year, as we burn fossil fuels. This rate is too small to affect human health directly, but it represents yet another chapter in the long dance between life and its gaseous environment. The story of Earth's oxygen is a reminder that our planet is not static. It has gone through radical transformations, sometimes driven by the simplest life forms. The air we breathe today is the product of billions of years of biological activity, chemical reactions, and geological processes. It's a living atmosphere, constantly maintained by the biosphere. And it brings us back to the Carboniferous, a time when a temporary imbalance in this system created conditions so alien that they've never been repeated. The giant insects of that era were not just curiosities, they were the products of a specific atmospheric moment, beneficiaries of a brief window when oxygen reached levels that would never be seen again. Scientists have experimentally confirmed the connection between oxygen and insect size. In 2010, researchers at Arizona State University conducted an elegant experiment. They raised fruit flies in atmospheres with different oxygen concentrations over multiple generations. The results were clear. Higher oxygen led to larger body sizes, while lower oxygen produced smaller flies. Similar experiments with dragonflies showed that modern species raised in 35% oxygen developed larger wing-to-body ratios and grew to sizes well beyond their normal range. These studies demonstrate that the genetic potential for gigantism still exists in modern insects. They simply can't express these traits in today's atmosphere. But the story becomes even more interesting when we consider another factor: atmospheric density. The Carboniferous atmosphere wasn't just oxygen-rich, it was likely denser overall. Computer models suggest that the combination of higher oxygen and different carbon dioxide levels would have created air that was approximately 20 to 25% denser than what we breathe today. For flying insects, this made an enormous difference. Denser air provides more lift for wings, making flight easier and less energetically expensive. Meganeura, with its massive wingspan, wasn't just able to breathe in the Carboniferous, it was able to fly more efficiently than would be possible today, even if modern oxygen levels could support its size. This density effect extended beyond insects. Early tetrapods, the amphibian-like creatures that were just beginning to exploit land environments, would have found the dense, oxygen-rich air much easier to breathe through their primitive lungs. It may have been a crucial factor allowing vertebrates to make the challenging transition from water to land. The Carboniferous atmosphere also had another distinctive feature. It was prone to spectacular, unstoppable fires. While modern forests can certainly burn under dry conditions, Carboniferous forests could burn even when wet. Laboratory experiments have shown that at 35% oxygen, even damp vegetation can sustain combustion. Ironically, these fires may have helped limit oxygen from climbing even higher. As oxygen increased, so did fire frequency, creating a negative feedback loop. More oxygen led to more fires, which consumed plant matter that would otherwise have been buried, returning carbon to the atmosphere and preventing further oxygen increase. Some scientists believe this fire feedback mechanism may have capped oxygen at around 35%. Any higher, and fires would have been so frequent and intense that forests couldn't recover. Evidence for these ancient fires comes from charcoal deposits in Carboniferous sediments. These charcoal layers suggest regular, intense burning, another aspect of that alien world that's difficult to imagine today. The ripple effects of this hyperoxic world extended far beyond just creating giant insects. The entire ecosystem was shaped by these atmospheric conditions in ways that transformed the evolutionary trajectory of multiple lineages. Consider the forests themselves. The high oxygen levels allowed plants to grow taller and faster than would otherwise be possible. Carboniferous lycopsids like lepidodendron could reach maturity in just 10 to 15 years, astonishingly fast for a 100-foot tree. Modern redwoods, by comparison, take several centuries to reach their full height. This rapid growth was possible because high oxygen concentrations enhanced photosynthetic efficiency. Plants could produce more energy with less effort, fueling explosive growth. The Carboniferous forests weren't just bigger, they were more productive, generating biomass at rates that would be impossible today. These forests were also structurally different from modern ones. Without the selection pressure of efficient decomposers, Carboniferous plants didn't need to invest heavily in defensive compounds to deter herbivores and fungi. Their tissues contained fewer tannins, resins, and other compounds that make modern wood resistant to decay. This may have made them more vulnerable to the insects that fed on them, driving an arms race that contributed to the evolution of different feeding strategies. The high oxygen environment also affected reproduction. Many Carboniferous plants reproduced via spores rather than seeds, a more primitive method that requires water for fertilization. The humid, swampy conditions of the Carboniferous were perfect for this reproductive strategy, but as the climate dried toward the end of the period, plants with seeds, which can be fertilized without standing water, gained an evolutionary advantage. This transition from spore-based to seed-based reproduction was accelerated by the changing atmospheric conditions. For amphibians, the oxygen-rich air presented both opportunities and challenges. Early tetrapods like Eogyrhinus and Proterogyrhinus grew to impressive sizes. Some reached lengths of 15 feet or more. Their primitive lungs worked more efficiently in high oxygen conditions, allowing them to venture further from water than would otherwise be possible. But these amphibians still had a critical weakness. Their eggs had to be laid in water to prevent drying out. As the Carboniferous climate shifted and swampy habitats became less common, this limitation became increasingly problematic. This created an evolutionary pressure that would lead to one of the most important adaptations in vertebrate history, the amniotic egg. Around 320 million years ago, the first true reptiles evolved. Their key innovation was an egg with a protective shell and internal membranes that kept the embryo moist. This amniotic egg was a biological breakthrough, freeing vertebrates from their dependence on standing water for reproduction. Early reptiles like Hylonomus and Paleothyrus were small, perhaps 12 to 20 inches long, but they had a crucial advantage over their amphibian contemporaries. They could lay their eggs on land in relatively dry environments. This adaptation, combined with scaly skin that prevented water loss, allowed reptiles to thrive in the increasingly arid conditions of the late Carboniferous and early Permian. As oxygen levels fell, the advantage shifted toward organisms with more efficient respiratory systems. Reptiles, with their improved lungs and circulatory systems, were perfectly positioned to inherit the world that was becoming increasingly hostile to giant arthropods. The transition from the Carboniferous to the Permian period around 299 million years ago marked the end of the giant insect era and the beginning of the age of reptiles. Oxygen levels continued to drop, reaching perhaps 15% during parts of the Permian, significantly lower than today's 21%. These changing atmospheric conditions drove one of the most significant transitions in Earth's history, from a world dominated by amphibians and giant arthropods to one increasingly controlled by reptiles. The descendants of those early reptiles would eventually include dinosaurs, pterosaurs, birds, and mammals, including us. In a very real sense, we owe our existence to the falling oxygen levels that ended the reign of the arthropod giants. The Carboniferous oxygen peak wasn't just an interesting aberration, it was a pivotal moment in Earth's history that shaped the evolutionary trajectories of multiple lineages for hundreds of millions of years, and its effects continue to resonate today. Consider the coal that powers much of our modern world. Those black rocks that fuel power plants and industries are the compressed, transformed remains of Carboniferous forests. The name Carboniferous itself means coal-bearing, reflecting the abundance of coal deposits from this period. When we burn coal, we're releasing carbon that was sequestered over 300 million years ago, reversing the process that created the oxygen peak in the first place. Ironically, our use of fossil fuels is causing a very slight decrease in atmospheric oxygen, about 0.001% per year. This is too small to affect human health directly, but it represents a tiny step toward reversing the great oxygenation event that made complex life possible in the first place. Of course, at the current rate, it would take thousands of years to make a significant difference in oxygen levels, and other effects of fossil fuel use, particularly climate change, are far more immediate concerns. But the history of Earth's oxygen teaches us something profound about our planet. It is not a static stage upon which life performs. It is a dynamic system in which life and environment constantly shape each other. The oxygen we breathe is biologically generated, maintained by the collective metabolism of countless organisms. Change the organisms, and you change the atmosphere. This perspective helps us understand why exoplanet researchers are so interested in detecting oxygen in the atmospheres of distant worlds. Free oxygen is relatively reactive and would quickly bind with other elements if not continuously replenished. On Earth, that replenishment comes from photosynthesis. Finding a similar oxygen signature on another planet would be a strong indicator of life, perhaps not intelligent life, but at least photosynthetic organisms altering their planetary atmosphere as they have on Earth. The search for biosignatures, chemical indications of life in exoplanet atmospheres, is one of the most exciting frontiers in astronomy, and it's informed by our understanding of how Earth's own atmosphere has been transformed by life over billions of years. But the oxygen story also has implications closer to home. Understanding how atmospheric composition affects evolution gives us insight into our own biology. Humans, like all mammals, are highly oxygen dependent. Our high metabolic rates and energy-hungry brains require constant, efficient oxygen delivery. This is why we've evolved such sophisticated respiratory and circulatory systems, lungs with millions of alveoli to maximize gas exchange, and hemoglobin-rich blood to transport oxygen throughout our bodies. These adaptations reflect our evolutionary history in an oxygen-rich environment. Unlike insects with their passive tracheal systems, vertebrates evolved active, pumping respiration that could scale up as animals grew larger. This allowed us to maintain high metabolic rates, even as oxygen levels fluctuated over geological time. Our dependence on oxygen is so complete that even small changes in its availability have profound effects. Ascend to high altitude, where oxygen partial pressure is lower, and you'll quickly feel the effects: shortness of breath, fatigue, and potentially more serious conditions like altitude sickness. Stay at high altitude long enough and your body will adapt by producing more red blood cells to capture what oxygen is available, a physiological response that demonstrates how tightly our biology is linked to this gas. At the other extreme, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, exposure to higher than normal oxygen concentrations, is used medically to treat conditions like decompression sickness, carbon monoxide poisoning, and certain infections. The extra oxygen dissolves directly in the blood plasma, bypassing the normal hemoglobin transport system and delivering more of this vital gas to tissues that need it. But too much oxygen can be harmful. Hyperoxia, oxygen toxicity, can damage the lungs, central nervous system, and other tissues. Our cells have evolved to function within a relatively narrow range of oxygen concentrations. Like Goldilocks, we need it to be just right. Not too little, not too much. This biological balancing act reflects the long history of oxygen on Earth. Our physiology is adapted to the current atmospheric equilibrium. 21% oxygen at sea level. Significant deviations in either direction would require substantial biological adjustments. If we were somehow transported back to the Carboniferous with its 35% oxygen, we'd experience something like oxygen intoxication. Our thinking would be impaired, our coordination would suffer, and eventually we might experience seizures. Evolution hasn't prepared us for such oxygen-rich conditions because they haven't existed for hundreds of millions of years. Conversely, if oxygen levels fell significantly, say to the 15% that existed during parts of the Permian, we'd feel constantly out of breath, like we were at high altitude. Our current physiology is calibrated to the atmosphere we've evolved in, not the atmospheres of the deep past. This raises an interesting question about human adaptability and space exploration. As we contemplate establishing human presence on other worlds, whether through visits or permanent settlements, we'll need to reckon with different atmospheric compositions. Mars, for example, has an atmosphere that's less than 1% the pressure of Earth's and contains only trace amounts of oxygen. Any human habitation would require artificially maintained environments with Earth-like air. Even more intriguing are proposals to terraform Mars, to transform its atmosphere to make it more Earth-like. Such projects would need to consider not just temperature and pressure, but the specific gas mixture that human physiology requires. We are, in a very real sense, creatures of our atmosphere, shaped by its particular chemistry over millions of years of evolution. This brings us back to the Carboniferous and its lessons about atmospheric change. The transition from high to low oxygen at the end of that period drove massive evolutionary changes and extinction events. It's a reminder that when atmospheres change, life must adapt or perish. Today, we're causing atmospheric change of a different kind, not primarily in oxygen levels, but in greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide. The rate of this change is unprecedented in geological history, occurring over decades rather than millions of years. The lesson from the Carboniferous is clear. Atmospheric change drives biological change, often in ways that are difficult to predict. But there's another lesson from the Carboniferous that's equally important. The insects and other arthropods that once grew to enormous sizes didn't disappear when oxygen levels fell. They adapted. They evolved more efficient respiratory systems, reduced their body sizes to match the new atmospheric constraints, and diversified into countless new niches. Today, insects are among the most successful animals on Earth, with over 1 million described species and many more yet to be discovered. They may be smaller than their Carboniferous ancestors, but they're arguably more successful. They've colonized virtually every terrestrial habitat on the planet, from deserts to rainforests, from mountain peaks to urban environments. This adaptability is a hallmark of life on Earth. When conditions change, life finds a way to continue, though often in new forms and with new dominant groups. The end of the Carboniferous oxygen peak didn't spell doom for life. It simply changed which organisms would thrive. As we face our own period of rapid environmental change, this perspective offers both caution and hope. The caution is that significant changes to Earth's atmosphere and climate will inevitably drive biological changes, including extinctions. The hope is that life as a whole has demonstrated remarkable resilience over billions of years, adapting to conditions far more extreme than anything humans have yet caused. Our own species, with its tremendous technological capabilities, has more adaptive options than any previous organism. We can create artificial environments, develop new technologies, and potentially even engineer biological adaptations, but we remain fundamentally dependent on the planetary systems that have sustained life for billions of years, the oxygen cycle among them. Understanding the history of Earth's atmosphere helps us appreciate how finely tuned our planet's chemistry is for life as we know it. The Carboniferous oxygen peak was a biological creation, the result of plants producing oxygen faster than it could be consumed. Its end was equally biological, the evolution of decomposers that could break down lignin and return carbon to the atmosphere. This balance, oxygen production versus consumption, continues today, maintained by the collective metabolism of the biosphere. It's a dynamic equilibrium, not a static condition, and it's one that can be disrupted by significant changes to the organisms that maintain it. The giants of the Carboniferous, the dragonflies with 2-foot wingspans, the millipede-like arthropod reaching 8 feet in length, the cat-sized scorpions were possible because of a specific atmospheric moment, a window of opportunity created by an imbalance in Earth's carbon cycle. When that imbalance was corrected by the evolution of lignin-degrading fungi, the window closed, never to reopen. But the impact of that brief hyperoxic world continues to reverberate through Earth's history. The coal formed during the Carboniferous fuels much of our modern civilization. The evolutionary pressures created by changing oxygen levels helped drive the development of the amniotic egg and the rise of reptiles. And the fossil record of giant arthropods provides a vivid demonstration of how atmospheric chemistry shapes the possibilities of life. The scientific investigation of Carboniferous oxygen levels and giant arthropods continues today, with new technologies providing unprecedented insights into this ancient world. One of the most exciting frontiers involves the study of amber, fossilized tree resin that sometimes contains tiny bubbles of ancient air. By analyzing these bubbles using advanced mass spectrometry, researchers can directly measure the gas composition of ancient atmospheres. Recent studies of Cretaceous amber have confirmed elevated oxygen levels during that period, though not as high as the Carboniferous, lending support to the methods used to estimate even older atmospheric conditions. Another innovative approach involves examining the microscopic structure of plant fossils. The density of stomata, the small pores on leaf surfaces through which gas exchange occurs, is inversely related to carbon dioxide concentration. When CO2 is abundant, plants need fewer stomata. When it's scarce, they develop more. By counting stomatal density in fossil leaves, researchers can estimate ancient CO2 levels, which in turn helps constrain oxygen estimates. Advanced imaging techniques are also revolutionizing our understanding of arthropod respiration. CT scanning and synchrotron imaging allow scientists to visualize the internal anatomy of both fossil and modern insects in unprecedented detail. These studies have revealed that insects can actively control the diameter of their tracheae, dilating them during periods of high oxygen demand like flight. This suggests that even Carboniferous giants had some ability to regulate their respiratory systems, though they remained fundamentally constrained by passive diffusion. Computer modeling has become another powerful tool. By creating detailed simulations of insect respiratory systems, researchers can test hypotheses about how size relates to oxygen requirements. These models suggest that in today's atmosphere, the theoretical maximum size for a flying insect is not much larger than the largest existing species. But in a 35% oxygen atmosphere, the size limit increases dramatically, aligning perfectly with the fossil evidence from the Carboniferous. The implications of this research extend beyond understanding Earth's past. As we explore other worlds, the question of how atmospheric composition affects the evolution of life becomes increasingly relevant. Mars once had a thicker atmosphere and liquid water on its surface. If life evolved there, how might it have been shaped by the Martian atmosphere's particular chemistry? What kinds of respiratory systems might evolve on worlds with different atmospheric compositions than Earth's? These questions aren't just academic, they inform our search for biosignatures, signs of life on other planets. By understanding how life and atmosphere interact on Earth, we develop better models for what to look for elsewhere. The Carboniferous oxygen peak also offers insights into potential futures for our own planet. While we'll never again see 35% oxygen due to the evolution of lignin-degrading organisms, human activities are causing other significant changes to atmospheric chemistry. The rapid increase in carbon dioxide from about 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution to over 420 parts per million today represents a rate of change unprecedented in geological history. Just as the shift from high to low oxygen drove major evolutionary changes at the end of the Carboniferous, today's atmospheric changes will likely drive biological adaptations. Some organisms will thrive in the new conditions, others will struggle. The specific winners and losers are difficult to predict, but the history of Earth's atmosphere suggests that significant change is inevitable. This perspective helps place current climate concerns in a broader context. Earth and its biosphere have experienced dramatic changes before. Life as a whole has proven remarkably resilient, but individual species, ecosystems, and climate regimes can change dramatically when atmospheric chemistry shifts beyond certain thresholds. The Carboniferous was a world of fire, where even wet vegetation could burn in the oxygen-rich air. Our future may be a world of heat, where increased greenhouse gases trap more of the sun's energy. Different drivers, different outcomes, but both demonstrate the profound connection between atmosphere and biosphere. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Carboniferous oxygen story is what it reveals about the interconnectedness of Earth's systems. The atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere, and geosphere don't exist in isolation. They constantly interact, each shaping and being shaped by the others. The oxygen that enabled giant insects came from plants. Those plants emerged from an evolutionary history shaped by earlier atmospheric conditions. Their ability to transform the atmosphere through photosynthesis changed the planet's chemistry, which in turn created new evolutionary pressures. This complex web of feedbacks and interactions is what makes Earth a living planet, not just a rock with life on it. Modern Earth system science emphasizes these interconnections. We now understand that to study any aspect of our planet, whether climate, biodiversity, or atmospheric chemistry, we must consider the whole system. The Carboniferous oxygen peak and its subsequent decline provide a vivid example of how these systems interact over geological timescales. When we look at a modern dragonfly with its incredible aerial agility and predatory precision, we're seeing the descendant of giants. The basic body plan, the respiratory system, the compound eyes, the predatory lifestyle, all were established hundreds of millions of years ago, when dragonfly-like meganeura ruled the Carboniferous skies. Today's dragonflies are smaller but no less impressive. Their flight capabilities and hunting success rates remain unmatched in the insect world. Similarly, when we examine modern millipedes or scorpions, we're looking at the diminutive relatives of once massive arthropods. They've retained many of the adaptations that served their giant ancestors, just scaled down to match the constraints of modern atmospheric conditions. This evolutionary continuity connects us directly to that alien world of 300 million years ago. The Carboniferous isn't just a remote period in Earth's history. It's present in the DNA of countless organisms around us, in the coal that still powers much of our civilization, and in the oxygen we breathe. The the study of this ancient hyperoxic world continues to yield new insights. Recent research suggests that elevated oxygen levels may have played a role in the evolution of complex flight behaviors in insects. The extra oxygen would have provided more metabolic energy, potentially allowing for the development of sophisticated neural control systems for flight. Other studies indicate that the transition from high to low oxygen at the end of the Carboniferous may have driven innovations in respiratory efficiency across multiple animal groups. As oxygen became less abundant, natural selection favored organisms that could make better use of what was available. This may have contributed to the development of more efficient lungs in early reptiles, setting the stage for the active, high-metabolism lifestyles of later dinosaurs, birds, and mammals. There's even evidence that changing oxygen levels influenced the evolution of animal behavior. Higher oxygen allows for higher metabolic rates, which in turn enable more active lifestyles. The predatory strategies of Carboniferous arthropods may have been shaped by the abundant energy available in their oxygen-rich environment. As oxygen declined, new behavioral adaptations would have been necessary. Changes in hunting strategies, activity patterns, and energy budgets. These ongoing discoveries remind us that the Carboniferous oxygen peak wasn't just an isolated phenomenon. It was part of Earth's long atmospheric history, a history that continues to unfold today. The current composition of our atmosphere, with its 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and trace gases, including the all-important carbon dioxide, represents the current equilibrium in this dynamic system. Will this equilibrium hold? Human activities are now a significant factor in atmospheric chemistry, particularly through greenhouse gas emissions. While our impact on oxygen levels remains minimal, our effect on carbon dioxide and methane is substantial. Just as the Carboniferous demonstrates how atmospheric change can drive biological change, our current situation suggests that we're conducting an unplanned experiment with Earth's systems. The lesson from the Carboniferous isn't that atmospheric change is inherently bad. Earth's atmosphere has never been static. Rather, it's that rapid change can drive extinctions and ecological disruptions when organisms don't have time to adapt. The transition from the Carboniferous to the Permian occurred over millions of years, allowing for evolutionary responses. Today's changes are happening orders of magnitude faster. Yet there's also hope in the Carboniferous story. It shows that Earth's systems tend toward new equilibria. When oxygen rose too high, fires increased, limiting further oxygen accumulation. When lignin-degrading fungi evolved, they brought the carbon cycle back into balance. Earth's history is full of such feedback mechanisms that moderate extreme changes. Understanding these mechanisms is crucial as we navigate our own impact on the planet. By studying how Earth responded to past atmospheric changes, we gain insights into how it might respond to current and future changes. This knowledge informs not just climate science, but conservation biology, environmental policy, and even space exploration. The giant insects of the Carboniferous were never meant to last forever. They were the products of a specific atmospheric moment, a window of opportunity created by a temporary imbalance in Earth's carbon cycle. When that imbalance was corrected by the evolution of new decomposers, the window closed and the giants disappeared. But they weren't evolutionary failures. They were supremely well adapted to their time and place, exploiting the unique conditions of their hyperoxic world. Their descendants continue to thrive today, having adapted to changing conditions over hundreds of millions of years. This perspective offers a profound insight about life on Earth. Success isn't about permanence. Nothing in evolution is permanent. It's about adaptation, about finding opportunities in changing conditions. The Carboniferous giants did exactly that, thriving in their oxygen-rich world for tens of millions of years before conditions changed again. As we face our own period of rapid environmental change, this insight becomes increasingly relevant. The question isn't whether Earth's atmosphere and climate will change. They always have and always will. The question is how we respond to those changes, both as a species and as stewards of the biosphere. The Carboniferous oxygen peak was a biological creation, the result of plants producing oxygen faster than it could be consumed. Its end was equally biological, the evolution of decomposers that could break down lignin and return carbon to the atmosphere. In both cases, life shaped the atmosphere, which in turn shaped life. Today, humans have become a geological force, capable of altering atmospheric chemistry at a global scale. This gives us a responsibility unique in Earth's history, the ability to consciously shape the future of our atmosphere and, by extension, the evolutionary trajectories of countless species, including our own. The legacy of the Carboniferous lives on, in the coal we burn, in the insects that buzz around us, and in the oxygen we breathe. By understanding this ancient hyperoxic world and its eventual transformation, we gain perspective on our own moment in Earth's long atmospheric history. We walk a quieter world now. The giants are gone. But their stories are still written in stone, in coal seams, in the genomes of their descendants, and in the very composition of the air around us. The Carboniferous wasn't just a strange chapter in Earth's history. It was a moment when the air itself changed what life could be, when creatures that seem impossible to us today were simply normal. And that perspective, that Earth has been many different worlds over its long history, is perhaps the most valuable insight of all. It reminds us that our current world isn't the only possible one. Earth has been and will be many things. The Carboniferous, with its giant insects and oxygen-rich air, is just one chapter in that ongoing story, a reminder of how thoroughly our planet can reinvent itself given enough